Bada bing, this is VikesNow. This is our official first offseason show of 2024. The Vikings finished 7-10 in 2023. They completely embodied a competitive rebuild. Hopes for the playoffs until the bitter end, the fourth quarter of week 18, when the other two teams, the Buccaneers and Saints, prevailed. The Vikings were eliminated, but then they ended up with the 11th pick, and you cannot script a more competitive rebuild than this. So we're going to start to hash out this offseason. I'm here with Josh Frey, the head honcho over at Purple PTSD. How's your week going, sir?
It's going good, man. Into the off season we go, and that means a lot of draft stuff for me. So I'm living a happy life right now. Couldn't be much better.
And then with the 11th pick, do you like, love, or dislike that?
I like it just because it feels like it gives them a lot of different options. Like they can trade up for a quarterback if they really see one that they like and they want to go get him, like a Jaden Daniels, even maybe a Drake May, or maybe Caleb Williams if he starts falling. That might be a little bit too much of a dream, but I do think that they're in a good spot to trade up for a quarterback, or they can stay put, draft a pass rusher like Latu out of UCLA. He'll be going right around in that area, or people won't like this, but they could also trade down. They don't have a third round pick right now. They have a ton of needs on that defensive side of the ball. And if they want to really focus on building that side up this offseason, they could also trade down and get a few extra top 100 picks and build that thing back up. So I do like where they're sitting right now.
And right now they have two picks in the top 43, I believe, because they have a
Yep.
second rounder this year. Last year, that was spent in a deal for TJ Hawkinson. When you talked about Caleb Williams and Drake Mays, I thought to myself, I didn't tweet this, but I was like, those guys should feel lucky they weren't in the national championship because they weren't under the microscope. Like JJ McCarthy played well, but didn't really have to do much. He said, here you go to the running backs. And then Michael Penix had a forgettable game. So I chuckled to myself that, well, these guys nothing happened to their draft stock because they didn't play in the national championship. But Penix, you think he'll be there at 11 if the Vikings talk themselves into him?
I as of right now, I would say so. Yeah, I kind of peg him more as one of those guys that'll go maybe mid first, could go even late first round, depending on what actually happens in terms of trading with teams moving up or down on the board. But yeah, I think Penix would be a viable option. I personally would kind of stay away from him just
Mm-hmm.
because of the injury history and stuff like that. But I mean, I think he'll be available, and if the Vikings like him, then they should be able to get him right there.
Yeah, the injury resume scares the shit out of me because I always look at life like this. If we draft him and then we're chilling on this show in November and boom, his ACL goes, we're gonna be like, we knew
Why'd
this
you do
was,
that? You
yeah,
knew that
yeah,
was happening.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like Marcus Davenport. Like you called it about a year ago, about 10 months ago. You said, well, yeah, he plays good sometimes, but he's hurt a lot of the time. And then we look back and we're chilling right now saying, oh, he only played 3.1 games. So that's my paranoia. Of course, if they do draft Penix, I will talk myself into it, or JJ McCarthy. He probably won't have to spend a top 11 pick on him. That would be the trade down scenario. But we're going to get into a lot of that in the next 3.5 months. Today, we're talking about offseason priorities. I've asked you to rank the top five. Naturally, we're going to start at the bottom rung of the ladder. So give me the number five priority, and we'll work our way up to the most important number one.
So number five, I'm gonna get us started talking about the running back room. Obviously, the whole Alexander Madison as the RB1, that experiment didn't work out. I think they just it feels like they held on to Dalvin Cook too long, and then they just kind of had to piece things together in 2023 because they were just kind of stuck by the time May rolled around. All the top free agents were off the board. The draft had already come and gone. So it kind of felt like that they were just patching that room together. And I think they need to focus on making that room a little bit better in 2024 because I mean, you look at all the playoff teams right now, like six of them rank in the top 10 in terms of rushing yards this season. And then you go down the board, the Packers are 15th, and the only teams worse than them are the Kansas City Chiefs, Houston Texans, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And like even then, the Chiefs are still in the top 20. The Vikings rank 29th. Like you can't get much worse than that. And if the Vikings really are committed to making a playoff run in the next couple of years, like, and they're not going to just absolutely tear everything down, I think they have to focus on building back that running game because it's very important in the NFL. Like you look at the teams and it's very clear that a lot of them use a stable running game and their offense to make sure that they can control the time of possession, make sure they stay on the field, and it buoys their passing game a lot. And I think the Vikings need to not necessarily find an RB1 because I do think that Ty Chandler has some skill in him, but I do think that they need to find a guy that can pick up those yards on like a 3rd and 3 where you absolutely need it. And the defense knows you're going to run the ball, or near the goal line where you're 4th and 1 on the goal line. You need to punch the ball. And I think they need to find that guy either in the draft or in free agency. But running back is number 5 on the list for me.
Here's what I think we did. We looked at Super Bowl winners in the last 12 years, whatever, and running backs. You see LeGarrette Blount, you see Jerick McKinnon last year, and you see all these anonymous players. And either we or the Vikings front office said, like, oh, yeah, we'll be fine. But you still need to have a productive trio or committee. You don't necessarily have to pay Christian McCaffrey 14 million or whatever it is per year, but you can't do nothing and suck. And I think that is what the Vikings have done with the running game. Who would be available at pick number 43 per running back right now?
I think you look at a guy, I mean, we saw him in the national championship, Blake Corum. I think he'll be available there. Even his teammate Donovan Edwards, sorry, if he declares for the draft, I think that he'd be available there and would be that type of guy where you give him the ball near the goal line and he'll be able to pick up those yards to get into the end zone. I would personally lean towards Edwards if the Vikings were going to draft one of those two guys, just because I think Corum is kind of the same sort of player that Ty Chandler is. It kind of just feels a little bit redundant to have two of those guys. So Edwards would probably be the guy that I'd lean for in terms of just Vikings draft needs. But yeah, those would be the two guys that I'm looking at right now. And we talked about it last week. Will Shipley, another guy that I think is a pretty talented running back out of Clemson. Don't know if I'd go 43 with him just because I feel like running backs overall just that it seems like teams are drafting them later and later and later every single year. So maybe don't use a second rounder on him. But those two Michigan guys, I think, in the second round, if the Vikings want to do that.
What will happen to your emotions or mindset if we get to minicamp and we hear Kevin O'Connell say, we like Ty Chandler. He's going to get 70% of the carries. We also have Dwayne McBride and Alexander Madison on this roster. We like where we're at. How will you feel about that?
I won't feel great, but I mean, at the end of the day, I do think that Ty Chandler showed some things down the stretch of the year, and it was very clear that he kind of took over that RB1 role over the past or the last few weeks of the season. So I do think that overall, if you want Ty Chandler to be your main focus in the running game, I think he's capable of that. Again, I just don't necessarily know if he's that guy that you want near the goal line picking up those touchdowns, because that's another area that the Vikings absolutely have to improve is in the red zone, because they scored on less than half of their possessions in the red zone this year. They scored touchdowns on 48%. So they need to get a lot better in that area. I've never been a really big Dwayne McBride guy, but you mentioned him, and I think that is kind of a role that he'd be able to fill. I mean, we saw him in the preseason. He scored, 3 touchdowns in the preseason? Maybe it was 2. But he was a guy near the goal line that the Vikings utilized in the preseason. Again, preseason, you can say what you want about how much that actually matters. But if the Vikings don't do anything, then I think he's going to get a much bigger role next year.
It's worth noting that during the Mike Zimmer brand of Vikings with a hodgepodge of offensive coordinators with Cousins, the Vikings were wonderful in the red zone. They took a lot of heat, a lot of times for Zimmer doesn't care about the offense, but in the red zone, they were really damn good. All right. So we got
last year.
Even
last year, they were good in the red zone. So it's a weird problem.
Yeah. Let's hope. Well, I think that's one they'll certainly recognize. You always hear turnovers, field position where you start, and then, red zone opportunities. So I think it'll be a point of emphasis. All right. So running backs, beyond the shadow of a doubt, at least if you're going to keep the same personnel and you're not going to add a free agent, there's a lot of free agent running backs. We forgot to mention that. Oodles of ones that people are going to be like, holy shit, that guy's available. Whether or not Kwesi wants to spend 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 million on a running back, that's up for debate, but there are tons of free agent running backs. So we shall see on the personnel part. What is number 4 on your off-season priority list?
Number 4, I just think they need to retool some of the skill positions on defense. We talked about where this Vikings defense ranks in terms of recent greats over the past few years, like 2017, 2019, even 2015, those types of groups. I still think that this defense, while Brian Flores did a great job of maximizing the talent that he had, I think they need to find some extra guys in there that can make those game-changing plays. I rank this defense a little bit lower just because they didn't force a ton of turnovers. They didn't give their offense extra opportunities with the football. And I think that while the 2022 defense was absolutely horrendous in a lot of areas, that was one area where they did do a lot of great things in terms of forcing those turnovers, like that Patrick Peterson interception against Buffalo. Those types of plays are what the defense lacked this year. And considering they really didn't do anything to improve this defense. They lost to Darius Smith. They lost Dalvin Tomlinson, who was just absolutely great in terms of run defense for them over the past couple of years, and they really missed that type of body. I think between defensive tackle, the pass rushing group, and cornerback, I think the Vikings need to find some sort of way to retool at least two of those three positions this offseason in order to improve on the defensive side.
In the first 3 games of the season, the Vikings defense was not good. It ranked 26th. In the middle 10 games, it ranked first in the NFL. My God,
Yeah.
it was like it has arrived. Let's build a statue of Flores. And then starting at the fourth quarter of the Bengals game, it was never the same. And in the last, was it 4 games from the Bengals on, it ranked 31st in the NFL. It was an odyssey. And I'm guessing maybe that has to just do with the personnel or that Flores' defense was solved. But I guess the optimistic take would be that, hey, if they can be really damn good for 10 games, perhaps with continuity in the coaching staff, with some more home run hitters, it can get back to being really good. It settled kind of right in the middle when it was all said and done. It certainly got better. The Ed Donatel defense claim to fame, as you said, was force turnovers and then very weirdly get good in the fourth quarter. And this year, during the stretch, the winning streak, and then thereafter against the Broncos and Raiders, it was great in the fourth quarter, but in the bad parts, it kind of crumbled. I am under the pretense, and I'll say this ad nauseum for the next 3.5 months, that the Vikings are going to draft a quarterback in the first round, which means they won't be able to draft some sweet ass defensive tackle like the Newton dude from Illinois. So if that's correct, we shall see who's a free agent or two that they could target with $37 million in cap space right now that, as we know from off seasons past, can probably inflate to 60 or 70 if they really want to. Who should they get on defense as a free agent?
I'm kind of looking at Josh Uche out of New England. I know you wrote about him a couple days ago over on Vikings territory, but I think that overall, I mean, his numbers don't pop off the page or anything, but he's also a guy that has gotten really limited opportunities in New England so far in his career. I think his pass rushing, I think when he's on the field, I think it's really good. It's kind of the same sort of situation with Marcus Davenport, except he doesn't get hurt as much, where Marcus Davenport is hurt all the time. So I think if the Vikings went out and got a guy like Uche, just a guy that can be a rotational pass rusher and just put some consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks, I think that's a guy that, at least for cheap, I think that the Vikings could go and target this offseason.
And in that article, thanks for mentioning it, he is exactly like Harrison Phillips in that he is an AFC East defender waiting for a second contract that doesn't really start on his current team, that just waiting for the opportunity. And it feels like it fits right in the Kwesi age range, affordability. And then I don't think he and Flores cross paths in New England, but I agree that that's there. If they want to spend a little bit more money, Bryce Huff, the Jets, they got a lot of pass rushers. If they let him go, he's another guy that always ranks near the top of the NFL in pass rush PFF grade. And for some reason, it looks like he might slip out the back door. So for certain, especially if they don't resign Danielle Hunter, my God, they need 1 or 2 edge rushers. So, all right, the defensive personnel priority is number 4. What's number 3?
Number 3, I think the Vikings absolutely need to do everything in their power to re-sign Danielle Hunter this offseason. That dude, after all the injury questions in 2020, 2021, can he stay on the field? Is he still a superstar? Over the past 2 years, this dude's recorded 35 tackles for loss and 27 sacks. Like, that type of production is just not something that grows on trees in the NFL, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You could draft a guy in the first round, but you'd be hoping that he comes anywhere near the same sort of production that Danielle Hunter has. And considering the Vikings already have 15 million dead money on the books for him this offseason, like, I'm totally fine with them going like 4 years, approach $100 million with him just to keep him in that room, because he single-handedly carried that pass rush throughout most of the season. Like, between Davenport's injury, Wanham's injury down the stretch of the season, they really didn't have a guy opposite him that consistently provided the pass rush for the Vikings. And he just continuously made sure that the Vikings pass rush at least stayed relevant this season because of how great he is. So I think the Vikings absolutely need to find some sort of way to bring him back this offseason.
And I think that they will. I know that he's on the top 5 everybody's free agent lists, like the NFL ones, like, hey, the best free agents available this year. He's up there, rightfully so. I just don't think the Vikings let him walk. One thing I love about him is there are tons of pass rushers, edge rushers in the NFL that their only shtick is rushing the passer. But I swear to God, every time there's a tackle for loss, I'm like, is that Wanham or is that Hunter? Oh, that's Hunter, number 99. So he does the run defense part too, which is why he should get 25 million per year and not, 17 or 18. The other part on Hunter is he said like 4 times in the past 8 months that he wants to be here. He said this week that the only jersey he's ever wore is purple, and that's all the way back to middle school and LSU and here. So it's not some big will he or won't he, does he want to be here? The guy loves it. And so you're starting at a really good point to bring him back. And then let me tell you what, if he signs the deal you're talking about, 4 years, 100 million, he's already been with the Vikings for 9 seasons. He's going to approach like John Randall level of prestigiousness in Vikings realms because of all the sacks, came back from the injury. He's going to be a Ring of Honor guy, especially if he signs this, I guess, 3rd contract. He's one of the few guys I've ever seen just play out an entire contract. Can you believe that?
Yeah, it's crazy. it just kind of speaks to the testament of he wants to be here. Like the fact that he's going through these contracts and he continues to re-sign with the Vikings, like, and just play through these contracts. Like, it's clear he wants to be here. So as long as the money's good, I think he sticks around too.
The contract that Spielman gave him was perfect for 2 reasons. Number one, Spielman gave him the trust, the benefit of the doubt that, hey, we're going to overpay you a little bit in 2018 because we think you're going to be really good. And it just became rapidly team friendly over the years. And of course, they added a little bit more meat to it to keep him last season. But it was like if you want to create a contract for a budding edge rusher, it was just perfect for everybody. He got a sweet guaranteed chunk back 5 years, 6 years ago now. And so it's really cool that I hope, will be back in the saddle. All right. So you have a running back, or at least improve the scheme, defensive personnel, beyond the shadow of a doubt, bring Danielle Hunter back. Let's get to the top 2. What is number 2?
Number 2, and you could argue this is number 1 even, but I think that the Vikings need to figure out what they want to do at this quarterback position this offseason. I don't want to see the one thing that I really don't want this offseason is the Vikings re-sign Kirk Cousins like 1 year, $35 million, and then they don't draft a quarterback. Yeah. I don't want to see this middle of the path that we've kind of seen over the past couple of years where the Vikings have their starter, but do they have a guy that's waiting in the wings and ready to take over if they lose him again next season? Because that happened this year and it was absolutely a disaster at the quarterback spot. I think that they need to really choose a path at quarterback, whether it's drafting a guy in the first round, like you mentioned, like trading up to get a Jaden Daniels, somebody like that, or even just drafting Michael Penix at number 11, whatever the case may be. Or, I mean, secondarily, just commit to Kirk for the next 3-4 years. Like, give him another long-term deal. It's very risky considering the age, but I mean, I just want them to commit to some sort of path at quarterback. Are they going to get a quarterback of the future, or are they going to commit to Kirk? Because, I mean, you look at this offense and it's loaded with talent everywhere, but if you don't have that quarterback position figured out, it can go downhill in a hurry like we saw this season.
So I agree with you. And I've been thinking a lot about this because some are frustrated by the competitive rebuild. You're living in the middle, you're mediocre. You hear that all the time. And I've tried to understand, why would a new regime come in and wait until a 3rd draft to maybe select a quarterback? And I think I figured it out. In 2022, their first year on the job, that draft class at quarterback sucked. We knew going into it sucked, and the only guy that's worth a damn is Brock Purdy, who was the last pick in the draft, and who the hell knew that was going to work out? So let's say Kwesi came in guns a-blazing, KOC, we're getting our guy. They would have landed with Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, one of these guys that right now we'd be doing VikesNow debating whether or not Kenny Pickett was the future. So I think they were smart by saying, you know what, we don't like this class. And then last year, since there's been 2 reports, one way back when, that if they were going to trade everything, they were going to do it for Bryce Young. And I still think the verdict's out on him. And then this one from, was it Darren? No, it's from Brett Coleman. Last weekend, that said that they were willing to, trade family members for Anthony, figuratively speaking, for Anthony Richardson. So I think that they have the oomph, they have the desire to do it. And we should just, thank heavens they didn't do it in 2022. They got close in 2023. And I swear to God, I will bet like my bank account that they're going to draft their guy this year, because they have this pragmatic opportunity to attach their job security to both worlds. So let's say they trade up and give whatever they need to get Jaden Daniels or Drake May. And then they also bring Kirk back for the 1 year, $35 million. You're doing both. You're appeasing the ownership that allegedly loves Cousins, and then you also have this brilliant prospect in your back pocket. If they don't draft a quarterback, they're going to be doing the same shit over and over, hoping that they get to 10-7 and make a sweet playoff run. So I am utterly convinced that they're going to draft a quarterback. And if it isn't at 11, then I guess the fail safe would be, well, we love Michael Pratt, your guy from Tulane, or JJ McCarthy's in round 2. So we're going to draft blah, blah, blah in round 1, and we'll get McCarthy on pick 43. But out of the first 2 rounds, I think there absolutely has to be a quarterback selected. Not like my edict, but my prediction. Is that wrong?
I would agree with that. And I think another part of that is Kwesi's on a 4-year deal as a GM, and he's halfway through that now. And if you don't take a shot at a quarterback now, when are you going to do it? Because by next year, you're going to be going into that final year of the contract. And if it's just Kirk Cousins on the roster, there's so much uncertainty with the future of the team. And it's like, what did this guy actually do in order to improve us for the future? So I think that I completely agree with you. I do think that they're going to take a quarterback in the first round. And I think the best option for them is just draft a quarterback, re-sign Kirk for 1 year, let the quarterback sit behind Kirk. Don't put a ton of pressure on him like we saw with Jaren Hall this year, where he was thrown into the starting lineup as a 5th-round pick. Maybe even just bring Kirk back, bring Mullins back, let him sit in that emergency QB3 role, whatever you want to do with Jaren Hall too. Maybe he's the backup instead of Mullins. But I do think that the best option is draft that quarterback, bring Kirk back for a year, let him sit, learn the offense. And then, like we've seen with Jordan Love this season, it hasn't always been pretty, but down the stretch of the year, he's been pretty damn good for the Packers. And I think a lot of that is because he got the opportunity to sit in that offense for a couple of years and really learn it, fine tune it, and know what he can and can't do in that offense. And just now they're in the playoffs with him.
Yeah. There's probably a lot of pro Cousins guys and gals watching this show, and I all the power to them. I just want to mention there's 2 things now that are new that are going against Cousins. Now, first one is obviously the Achilles injury. We've seen Kevin Durant come back and be great. We've seen Aaron Rodgers probably come back and be pretty good. But there's always a risk that the player is not quite the same. Now, Cousins didn't usually use his wheels as is, but that is not an injury that's just, a hamstring. He'll be bounced right back. It's a big damn deal that in, 25 years ago could have been a career ender. And then secondarily, quarterbacks hit a wall right around this age. We like to think, well, no, Kirk is Kirk. He'll play until he's 40. He might. But if Russell Wilson could start to visibly decline at age 33, and we've seen Breeze could hardly throw. Roethlisberger was right about, 37, 38 when he started to look a little goofy. Would you really, like you personally, Josh, we got to week 2 of 2024 and it's Kirk, and we're like, it just isn't the same. Would you be surprised? I wouldn't.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. And I think we've kind of gotten spoiled over the past few years with guys like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, even Drew Brees back in the late 2010s. Yeah, LeBron in basketball, all those guys that are playing into their mid-late 30s at a really high level. I think we've gotten spoiled with just some historic talent at the position over the past few years. And we've kind of seen that kind of go back downhill a little bit, where we haven't seen awesome quarterback play in the NFL at all the way down the board for the past couple of years now. And I think that it's just kind of regressing back to the mean, where we don't have all these historically great guys at the position anymore. Peyton Manning, another one who was really great until his late 30s, and then he won that Super Bowl, but it wasn't because of his arm. But I mean, yeah, I think we're getting back to the mean, where these guys are going to get into their mid 30s and kind of start to regress a little bit, like we saw with Russell Wilson here in Denver over the past couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Cousins takes a similar step back next year.
Yeah, even and that's not guaranteed to happen. Cousins could come out and fling it, and he was on pace for 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns this year, believe it or not. But I mean, there have been goofballs in the past, like Don McNabb, who was washed by the time he got to the Vikings, and he was like 32, 33. Jay Cutler was kind of a backup quarterback in Miami, I think, by age 33, 34. So yeah, we're riding this wave of, hey, new medicine says we can play till 45 like Tom Brady, and it's just not the norm. All right, a quarterback. I'm surprised this wasn't number 1, but I'm going to guess I think I know your number 1. What is it?
Number 1, I mean, this guy is the absolute, he is the future of this Vikings offense, and it is Justin Jefferson. The Vikings need to get him a contract extension this year. I don't know about you, but I would feel absolutely horrible about this team's future if we went into the 2024 season and this guy is on the final year of his rookie deal and is about to enter unrestricted free agency. I think that teams, if given the opportunity, would throw historic amounts of money
Mhm.
his way to come play. And I mean, they're maybe he loves Minnesota, but I mean, I do think that he would be tempted to go, I don't know, join Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, his old college teammates, and just find a Super Bowl contender and latch on with them because above all, this guy wants to win. And I mean, especially if the Vikings are unable to really secure that quarterback position, and we're looking at Justin Jefferson in a couple years not knowing who's going to be throwing him the football. I think if they don't get him signed to that extension this offseason, I think that there's a chance that he looks elsewhere. I don't think it's a really high chance just because he does love Minnesota and that's the team that drafted him. That's where he wants to be for his career. He said it over and over again. But the Vikings need to make sure that there is absolutely no possibility of him leaving because he is the best wide receiver in the league. He is what makes this offense click, and the Vikings need to make sure that he is here for the next 5, 6 years, whatever it is.
And I agree. I would certainly have this at number 2 on my list next to the quarterback, but it's only because I don't think it's that big of a mystery. That's not discounting your list. I've heard every leader like down the line from each Wilf brother, Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell talk about how this is our guy this is our franchise. So I don't know what they got snagged on in early September. Remember, like that Saturday before the season started, they did a cap conversion. I think it was on Brian O'Neill's contract. And I'm
Yep.
pretty sure they were that close because they thought the deal was done. So I'm not sure if it was, 28 million versus 31 million per year. I don't know what it was, but I'm guessing that will be the formality that they go ahead and get passed and sign this year. And if they didn't, God, I think the doomsday scenario would be if he's like, you know what, never mind. You guys pissed me off. I'm not doing that. You would have to trade him during this draft, which I don't even really want to talk about. I don't think they would let him sniff the final year of his deal and then hit free agency. But I think it's all a moot point that pretty relatively soon, the next 2 months, that'll be one of the first offseason dominoes. Probably the news about what they're going to do with Kirk, and then boom, re-upping with Jefferson. What do you think that will be? You think that'll be 4 years, 120 million, 30 million per year, or not quite that much?
I think that might be the floor of his deal. That's kind of what Tyreek Hill got. And I think that Jefferson, considering he's younger than Tyreek
Yeah.
Hill was when he got that deal, and just how great he is all over the field. Like he wasn't great in the red zone during his rookie year, but over the past
Mm-hmm.
few seasons, we've seen him take a step up in that area too. So the fact that he can contribute at every single level of the field, I kind of think we might be approaching that 4 year 130 million
Okay.
for him, or maybe even a little bit higher than that.
Okay, that's fair. All right, give us one wild card upset before we take you off air.
I think the Rams are going to go into Detroit and upset the Lions. It's gonna be a ruckus atmosphere, but I mean, if there's anybody that can go in there, it's Matthew Stafford going into his old home and upsetting that team. I think there's going to be a little bit of jitters on that Detroit sideline, considering it's their first home game in 30 years or whatever. And the Rams are a proven Super Bowl contending team with Matthew Stafford on that roster. Sean McVay's been there twice. Matthew Stafford led them to that Super Bowl title of 2021.
Mhm.
So I think that the Rams are going to go in there and win this weekend.
And I agree with you. And I think because now the Lions have entered they're actually a division rival now. I think it is absolutely hilarious that they finally get their home playoff game, their first division crown in 3 decades. And then they look down at the schedule and it's like, oh, Matthew Stafford's coming to the building. I mean, think about how storybook that is in a bad way for them.
It's perfect. Yeah, the script writers did a great job this year with this one.
Oh man. And it's like I'm gonna guess that 80% of fans thought son of a bitch because that could have gone either way. If the 49ers held on, the Lions will be playing the Packers. And I'm gonna guess they
Yep.
would rather play the Packers than Stafford. 12 years the guy spent there. All right,
Yeah, I
man.
mean, heck, they beat the Packers in a playoff atmosphere last year on the road, so I think they would welcome Green Bay going into there rather than
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford.
Oh, absolutely. All right, sir. This was a wonderful opening salvo to the off season. We'll watch this weekend's wild card and then come up with the topic, probably more off season fodder about these Vikings for next week. You have a wonderful 7 days, and we'll talk to you then. All right.
Sounds great, man. See you then.
Yep. Later.